Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Power Hour. We're delighted to have you with us this morning. And today we're coming to you live from the Corcoran Group studios in downtown Bluffton. How about that? Well, we're coming off a phenomenal few weeks, and what an incredible time with the RBC Heritage. And Hilton Head Island was in the spotlight all over the world. The weather was fantastic. Sunday, what more can you say about Sunday in the final round? Again, incredible. And we even got some extra airtime on CBS and around the world. Big shout out to Steve Wilmot, Heritage Classic Foundation, all the volunteers, and really all of those on Hilton Head Island in Bluffton that made the week just an incredible, incredible week. Speaking of big weeks, we have two big weeks coming up ahead of us, a Small Business Week and National Travel and Tourism Week. Both of those happening May 4th through the 10th, and you won't want to miss the activities, planning seminars that we had, and be a part of those. We'll also be having our Bluffton Block Party. You want to sign up for that. Some of those are already selling out, so please sign up for those. There's a link in our chat box to register for more info, including the AI for Business workshops happening both in Bluffton and on Hilton Head Island. And then, as always, today we'll be taking your questions via chat box. So I'd encourage you to not to be shy this morning. And most of you aren't shy when it comes to asking questions on Power Hour, and we certainly appreciate that. Let's dive right in. We're thrilled this morning to kick off with Dr. Joy Von Nessen, the senior economist at USC's Darla Moore School of Business, a familiar face of us and one of the most trusted voices in South Carolina. Dr. Von Nessen is going to help us make sense of what's happening on Wall Street, what the latest tariff talk in Washington could mean for our local businesses, and how to cut through the noise when it comes to those economic headlines. He's not just tracking the numbers, he's great at helping us connect the dots and what it means for us here at the local level. Great to have you back with us, Dr. Von Nessen. We appreciate it, and we look forward to your update once again today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Bill, and good morning to everyone. I'm going to share my screen real quick here, so hopefully everybody can see that. And I first want to just say thank you for inviting me to participate with you all this morning. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I know we have a lot of information and a full agenda today, so we'll just jump right in and looking at South Carolina's economic outlook. Some things, of course, have changed since we last got together back in January. So we want to do essentially an update as to what has changed in the first quarter and how that influences our outlook for the rest of this year. And of course, the biggest change, as we all know, is that we've seen an increase in uncertainty. That's really the emerging theme for 2025, both in South Carolina and across the U.S., largely due to the back and forth on trade and tariff policy. So one helpful way to look at the outlook is to really start by getting our arms around this theme of uncertainty and what that implies about how we can think about the future. And the way to do this is to step back and look at our economic outlook from three different perspectives. And we did this previously in January, and I still think this is a good way to break down the economy in different segments, because it gives us some insight into how we can think about how different aspects of our economy are currently performing. So we can look at three methods of evaluation: economic perception, economic performance, and economic expectations. So we can go through each one of those individually, and then we'll talk about what that means when we put all three together in terms of our overall outlook. So in terms of economic perception, how do people feel about the economy as we approach the end of April of 2025? And as many of you know, the short answer to that question is not good. And we can see that by a number of different measures. Here, this is the easiest way to assess overall confidence, looking at the Consumer Confidence Index itself. And you can see that consumer confidence has decreased in 2025 during the first several months, during the first quarter. But it's also true that consumer confidence has been low for the last several years. So even though it has gone down in 2025, it's important to recognize that it's not unique to 2025, this lack of consumer confidence. It goes all the way back to 2020. And the reason is because of inflation. because prices have been rising faster than wages, going all the way back to 2020. And that has generated this loss in confidence. People really dislike inflation. And the most straightforward way to see this is to note that the biggest drop in consumer confidence since 2020 didn't take place in 2020 itself, despite the fact that we saw a broad-based shutdown of the economy. It didn't take place in 2025 with the back and forth on trade policy. It took place between 2021 and 2022. And that's because that was the period of time we saw the biggest increase in inflation. So it just shows you how much consumers in general dislike inflation because it erodes purchasing power. And consumers are still trying to claw back the lost purchasing power due to a period of time where prices were rising faster than wages. Now, does that translate into economic performance, the fact that consumer confidence has been so low? And the answer is no, not at least through the first quarter of 2025. So we can still grade the economy at a level of B plus, meaning that by most economic metrics, again, through the end of the first quarter, we've continued to see a fairly stable economy in South Carolina and to a lesser extent at the US level. We've had steady rates of consumer spending, historically low unemployment in South Carolina, as well as strong wage growth, despite the fact that consumers have lost significant purchasing power. Now, you might have also have seen that we received received GDP data this morning. Those were released for the first quarter of 2025, and we actually saw a slight decrease in GDP. It was down 0.3%. But if you dig beneath the surface of that number, what you'll find is that the main reason for that decline was because businesses were stocking up on inventory in anticipation of price increases due to tariffs, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. But at the same time, in the first quarter, we saw the labor market holding up fairly well, and we also saw consumer spending that continued to be fairly resilient. So the GDP numbers show that consumer spending is still stable overall, even though we're seeing a situation where businesses are preparing for higher prices. So we're at a B plus level now, but of course we have two opposing forces in 2025 that can pull us in different directions. I mentioned the emergence of tariffs as being one that could potentially put upward pressure on prices, but we also have a second opposing force, which could move us in a positive direction, which is the return to pre-pandemic norms or pre-pandemic trends. So let's talk about the return to pre-pandemic trends first, which can move us from a B plus economy closer to an A economy. And then we'll talk about the emergence of tariffs, which can potentially move us perhaps to a B or a B minus economy in the second half of the year. So what do we mean by a return to pre-pandemic trends? Well, essentially, we have been in a period where we've been going through red hot demand and a pandemic bubble over the last several years. Recall back in 2020 and in 2021, we saw a rapid recovery from the COVID recession and $6 trillion in stimulus that were injected into the US economy. And that put consumers and households in very good financial shape. And they spent those dollars, but primarily in the goods market because we were all socially distanced. And so as you can see here, we saw a goods bubble form that peaked in 2021 and has been deflating ever since. And the good news is that in 2024, that goods bubble finally fully deflated back to pre-pandemic levels, which means that in the goods sector, we can begin to see more sustainable rates of growth in 2025. And this is going to affect markets in South Carolina like housing and manufacturing. And housing, for example, has seen some months of positive growth in the first quarter of 2025 after seeing a consistent contraction period where they were going through more than a year where they saw negative rates of sales growth. So that readjustment, that correction period is largely behind us now and bodes well for the possibility of more sustainable growth as we move forward into 2025. We can also see this readjustment in the labor market. It's not just about the goods bubble and that red hot demand isolated there. We see it more generally And you can see here, employment growth for the US has been slowing since early 2023. Again, unsustainably high levels of employment growth that has been tapering off. And this represents the number of monthly job gains at the US level. And the black lines there are the sweet spot, right? So we'd like to see between 100,000 and 200,000 jobs per month created in the US. And that those two black lines there represent that sweet spot between 100 and 200. And you'll notice as the labor market has been cooling over the last couple of years, I denoted the summer of 2024 here because there's a big blank spot, right? Because we had 3 consecutive months where job growth was below where we would like it to be. And if you recall, in September of 2024, the Federal Reserve began to lower interest rates. So you can see very clearly the type of data that the Fed is using to inform interest rate policy, and they help to stabilize this labor market, which has been fairly stable ever since going into or through the first quarter of 2025. We see a similar picture if we look at South Carolina, the same slowdown during the summer. In this case, our sweet spot is between 2,000 and 4,000 jobs created per month, but the same overall trend that we're seeing. And then we can also look at tariff activity. So this is the other side of the coin, and we'll wrap up with looking at the influence of tariffs. So again, the good news being for 2025 that we're in a period of the potential for more sustainable growth, moving away from that pandemic era bubble. But we do see the emergence of tariffs, and the short run impact of tariffs is that they can put upward pressure on prices. And we have to remember that tariffs at the end of the day are just a tax on imported goods, or we can think about them as a tax on imported goods. And so they have the potential to raise prices, and that can make it harder for consumers to continue spending at their current levels, particularly given that they have lost purchasing power over the last several years already. And the easiest way to see this is to just do a direct comparison between growth in wages and growth in prices. So you can see here the cumulative effect of inflation has been higher than the cumulative effect of wage growth since 2020. And if we project out into the future, if we continue to see inflation at its current rate of 2.4%, consumers will recover all their purchasing power by 2027. But if inflation increases at all, let's say to 3.0%, then it would be closer to 2029. So this is not a forecast. This is just to illustrate the point that small changes in inflation can have significant impacts on how quickly consumers can claw back their lost purchasing power. And that is important because if consumers don't claw their purchasing power back, if they continue to see rising prices, they could cut back on spending, and that could further slow economic activity. But we don't know the extent to which prices will rise. That's a real wild card for this year. And the Fed doesn't know either. And they're very clear that they're in no hurry to act with respect to lowering interest rates this year. As you see here, Chair Powell recently said, for the time being, we're well positioned to wait for greater clarity. So they're in a position of looking at how tariffs could impact inflation. We're anticipating that we'll see some uptick in price levels as we move into the summer months, but we don't know the extent to which that is going to happen yet. So we'll be monitoring that very closely. So wrapping up, where are we today? At the end of April, the US and South Carolina economies have remained stable through the first quarter, having readjusted to more sustainable growth patterns, again, getting back to that pandemic bubble that we've been coming out of over the last several years. But there is a significant chance that we'll see inflation rebound as we move into the summer months. So that makes inflation the biggest single threat for our economic outlook this year. Because again, if we see prices rise, given the fact that consumers have already lost a significant amount of purchasing power over the last several years, that could lead them to pull back on their spending activity, and that could slow the economy in the second half of the year. And we do anticipate that regardless of whether we go into a recession this year, that we will see slower growth in 2025 compared to 2024. And again, the data that we've seen coming in this morning on the GDP for first quarter GDP echoes that and provides some evidence that we're beginning to see a bit of a slowdown. But I think it's important to recognize too that even with more mild growth in 2025 projected, South Carolina still remains well positioned for strong growth in the coming years. We have enormous competitive advantages throughout the state in terms of our industry composition, in terms of our population growth. So we're very bullish about the long run outlook over the next 3 to 5 years, even if we see a tapering or slowdown in growth in 2025. So with that, I will stop and turn it back over to Bill and be happy to answer any questions.
All right, Dr. Von Essen, thank you. Thank you very much. And it probably comes as no surprise. We have lots of questions for you this morning coming in from our listeners. And the first one hits close to home here and is dealing with real estate. And Peter's asking if you can talk a little bit about the economic impact on real estate.
Yes, that's a great question. And so far through the first quarter, when we look at how the housing market has held up in 2025, we've seen fairly flat growth, fairly weak growth overall, positive growth, either slightly positive or slightly negative, depending on the market. In general, in the coastal areas of South Carolina, growth has still been positive in terms of sales and in terms of price appreciation, but just very, very mild growth overall. And the reason for that is that, and in some markets, we've seen some pullback, some negative growth in sales and in declining prices. And the reason for that is the uncertainty. And we look at a combination of the fact that consumers are now more wary about purchasing big ticket items because of the uncertainty that we're seeing across the board. And affordability remains a challenge. Mortgage interest rates have remained elevated compared to where they were in the last several years and certainly before the pandemic. And despite the fact that the Federal Reserve lowered rates in late 2024, mortgage interest rates have still hovered around 7%. And because many existing homeowners currently have low mortgage interest rates on their existing mortgages, it's not very attractive for them to want to move if they don't have to. In other words, if they're currently have a rate of, let's say, 3 to 4%, moving to a rate of between 6 and 7% may not be something that they want to do. So we're still seeing elevated mortgage interest rates, and that combined with the uncertainty has led to weaker growth in the early part of 2025. I think that's likely to continue as we move into the summer months. And we'll see if we get a resolution on some of these tariff policies that could alleviate some of that uncertainty. But in the meantime, weak growth for 2025 that we've seen in the first quarter is likely to persist into the summer months.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Next question is coming from Andy, and Andy is asking what's going on with gold prices, how does the uncertainty affect that?
So gold prices typically work in basically in an inverse relationship to stocks. In other words, gold is typically more of a safe harbor. And so when you see more uncertainty and more concerns about the future, and especially in the short run, when you're looking at the potential of a slowdown or a recession, then people tend to move away from stocks and into more safe investments, or what are perceived as safe investments. And gold typically tends to be one of those. So that's the type of relationship that we see. But I think from an investment standpoint, certainly it's important to think about the long run as well. And so I often like to use an analogy of the economy and the stock market in general. We have a better sense of where the economy is going in the short run than we do in the long run, right? It's very hard to predict where the economy is going to be 10 years from now. And in a real sense, the stock market is exactly the opposite. In 10 years or over time, we are going to see the American economy continue to expand and grow, and the stock market is going to increase over time. But what is it going to do in the next month or two is extremely hard to predict. And what you see is that in times of uncertainty, when there is concern about short-term stock market performance, you tend to see people move away to more safe investments, including in gold. And that's what we're seeing right now.
Joey, I think you're seeing our questions that are coming in, because that kind of goes right into our next question that's coming from Grace. And Grace was saying, I'm nervous about my stock portfolio. Historically, what are the odds of it retaining its value?
Yes, and that's a great question, and I know certainly people, especially that are getting closer to retirement within a few years, are more concerned there. And the short answer is that you really do have to look at your portfolio and the stock market from a long-term horizon rather than a short-term horizon, and that's because we do see the stock market grow over time. That's been a consistent pattern throughout the 20th century and the 21st century. So the fact that we have seen some pullback this year is again is normal, is what we see periodically, the ebbs and flows of the stock market, again for different reasons. But in general, we are going to see the American economy continue to grow over time, and so these losses that have taken place will recover. So that we can be very confident in. The question is how long it takes, of course, and that's the big uncertainty. So I think it's just important to put that in perspective and recognize that yes, we are seeing these short run fluctuations. We will see the stock market recover, but again, it's really hard to put a time frame on that. I will say, however, that if we look at what the Trump administration is doing, part of their goal here is to create better trade deals with our partners around the world. And to the extent that they're able to accomplish that in the coming months, that could restore some confidence in markets and restore business confidence. And so we could see a recovery in the market fairly quickly. Again, we don't know when that's going to happen, but that's part of the process as well. So we just have to keep our eye on how things are evolving on the trade front, because that is really what's influencing most of the stock market volatility right now.
All right. Thank you for your answer on that. Next was coming from Tom. And Tom is asking, we have a tourism economy. How do you think the uncertainty will impact consumer confidence to travel?
Great question. So we're already seeing an impact there. And I didn't have a chance to show you this graph this morning, but we have seen a pullback. It's still positive growth, but a pullback in growth in leisure and hospitality during the first quarter in South Carolina. Leisure and hospitality mainly referring to hotels and to restaurant spending. Still positive, like I said, but lower than the state average and some pullback, so weaker growth in the first quarter. And so we're seeing the effects of the uncertainty already playing out. And again, the question is, will that continue into the summer months? I think the consumers certainly remain wary and so consumer spending is being affected. We already see that in the leisure and hospitality sector. And again, we'll see if that continues or if this is more of a short-term blip on the radar.
All right. Next was coming from Amelia. And Amelia is saying that tariffs seem pretty confusing for consumers with big numbers like 125%. What is the motivation in DC, and how will it have a positive impact, and when?
So great question. So I can't speak too much in the weeds on the politics, but one of the goals of the tariffs is to use them as a negotiating strategy for making better trade deals with our partners around the world. And so from that perspective, many of these tariffs are likely to be temporary, at least to the extreme level that we have seen so far. So we'll see how that plays out in the coming months, what type of trade deals are negotiated. But in the long run, so we have to look at costs and benefits, though. So the cost of the tariffs are come across in terms of higher prices for consumers. And the problem is that the costs of the tariffs show up immediately, right? Because when you implement a tariff, then that is going to immediately have an impact on the cost structure of those goods to which the tariffs apply. But the potential benefits of the tariffs come later, come down the road, because the goal of the tariffs in many cases is to get, as I mentioned, better trade deals and more investment in the United States, particularly in manufacturing. And so how long does it take to get a manufacturing plant moved to the United States or built in the United States and go into full operations? You know, that could be a multi-year process. So the costs are typically borne up front. The benefits typically come down the road. And again, it can be 1, 2, 3 years down the line. And so, and that's why tariffs are so controversial, because there are costs and benefits, and they don't line up in the same time frame. And so that generates that to the questioner's point, that generates a lot of confusion because we don't necessarily see all the pieces coming together at the same time. But that at the end of the day is why they're so controversial. From an economic perspective, we can point out the costs and the benefits, but the politics around tariffs is whether the benefits outweigh the costs, or whether the benefits are worth the cost that we pay in terms of higher prices for consumers.
Dr. Von Essen, thank you so much for being with us today. You certainly teed that up well also for our next guest. And I don't think there's anybody out there that does it better and explains it so that we can all understand it. And thanks for what you do and being on with us again today, Dr. Von Essen.
Thank you, Bill, and thanks to everyone. My pleasure.
All right. We're going to transition now and take a look more at the national perspective. And we're honored and delighted to have with us the senior senator from the great state of South Carolina. Senator Lindsey Graham is with us this morning, and Lindsey will be speaking to us about what he's seeing in Washington, D.C., what's going on around the country. We'll talk a little bit about some of the several key Senate committees that he sits on, being Appropriations, Judiciary, Budget, Environment, and Public Works. Senator Bill Miles here with the chamber. Good to see you this morning. We're delighted to have you with us. And,
thank you. I wish I were there.
I bet you do. Tell us a little bit what you're seeing in Washington and around the country, and then maybe how that's going to affect all of us here in South Carolina.
Well, I see a lot of traffic this morning. I think everybody in the country's up here. Did it go away? Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay,
sir.
Good.
Got you.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. So 2025 can be one of the most important years in the history of the country, maybe since 1945. So from a chamber point of view, it's really important that the 2017 tax cuts bill are made permanent. Now, I'm the budget chairman. And I've been on the budget committee for like 10 years. I think I went to one meeting, all of a sudden I'm chairman, but I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. So reconciliation is a process you can use with a majority vote only in the Senate if you have the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Republicans have had this combination 4 times in 100 years. So it doesn't happen much. In 2017, when we had the House, the Senate, and the White House, we passed President Trump's tax cuts. It's $4.5 trillion. You got accelerated depreciation. You got R&D tax credits. A lot of things very important to business, and they all are going to expire in December. So the House and the Senate are taking up the reconciliation bill. I've got a couple of goals: $175 billion to keep the border secure. Crossings, illegal crossings, since President Trump has come into office, is gone down by 95%. We didn't need new laws. We just needed a new president. Let me say that again. We had 11 million illegal crossings during the Biden years. A couple of days ago, we had 200 illegal crossings, averaged about 15,000. So it's been a dramatic turnaround. But to maintain this, we need more ICE agents. We need to finish the wall, and we need detention beds so we don't have to release people into the community that are dangerous because we don't have space to keep them housed until they're deported. So we have 40,000 detention beds. We want to go up to 125,000. That whole package is $175 billion. That's in the reconciliation bill. The reconciliation bill will allow to make the tax cuts permanent. Now, I decided as the budget chairman to stop the practice of letting tax cuts expire after 10 years. I rejected the idea that was sound policy. I think the tax cuts should be made permanent to allow business people to plan. So the House starts that process this week. I am hoping we can get the one big beautiful bill through, cut spending, make the tax cuts permanent, $150 billion for DOD, which will help our footprint in Beaufort County and everywhere else. But the main thing for me is to make these tax cuts permanent so you can plan your future, keep that border secured, Trump is trying to end the Russia-Ukraine war. The sooner we can end that honorably, the better. 5,000 people a day are dying. You need to do it in a way not to create another war. We don't want China to think the West is weak and will do nothing to protect Taiwan. But the killing needs to stop, and we need to make sure Putin doesn't do this again. I've been working very closely with President Trump on this. I have a sanctions bill on Russia that will put tariffs on any country that bought Russian oil, gas, or uranium. If they don't come to the table, that would really cripple their economy. Israel is one of our best allies. I go there often. The people that want to destroy Israel want to destroy us. And Iran has enough highly enriched uranium to build probably a dozen bombs. They haven't done that yet, but they have the material to do it. And Israel can't go much longer without taking action. I'd love to have a diplomatic solution, but the only solution I would agree to is for Iran to give up their enrichment capability, dismantle their program. They can have nuclear power like other countries do, where the fuel to run the reactor, the spent fuel rods, are made outside of Iran. They don't need to enrich to have nuclear power, but you do need to enrich to have a bomb, and I want to get them out of the bomb making business. So there's a lot going on, and this is going to be decided fairly soon. But from a Chamber of Commerce point of view, the best thing we can do for the Chamber and individual families is to get these tax cuts permanent. If they expire in December, that'd be catastrophic to the country, to the business. $2,000 increase per family in South Carolina. We don't need that. As to the tariffs, I think they make sense in a couple areas. Whatever you do to us, we're going to do to you. A lot of countries have higher tariffs on America than we have on them, and we need to level that out. Go to zero or just have the same number. A car made in Greenville, South Carolina, the BMW made in Greenville, if we sell it to Europe, it's at 10% tax by the EU. If you make that same car in Munich and sell it to America, it's 2.5%. So that's a good example of where we need to go to have reciprocal tariffs. Whatever you do to us, we're going to do to you. Mexico is letting fentanyl come across the border. 3,000 Americans every 2 weeks die from fentanyl poisoning. The precursors are made in China. It comes across the border in Mexico. We need to basically tell Mexico, if you don't help us more, we're going to put tariffs on your products. When people help Iran buy their oil and gas, I'm willing to put tariffs on countries that do that. That makes sense to me. General economy-wide tariffs on steel and aluminum helps us here at home some, but I'm afraid it may be inflationary. So what I hope is that we'll get a bunch of new trade agreements where we will knock down unfair trade practices that are non-tariffs. A lot of countries like China require you to have a majority, the owner of the business has to be Chinese, that your business board will have a Chinese Communist Party member. That's not fair to America. China manipulates the value of its currency. With the dollar going down, the yuan should go up, but the yuan is at the same level as the dollar because the Communist Chinese Party suppress the value of the yuan, making their products cheaper. And Argentina, they won't let Americans sell beef to Argentina because of the GMO excuse. It's not a problem. The way we grow beef is sound and healthy. We all eat beef. So Argentina is excluding American beef, not by tariffs, but by trade practice that I think is unfair. If we could knock these unfair trade barriers down, then we'll have a much more level playing field. And I'm hoping we can start seeing the benefits of this pushback soon. But I do worry about economy-wide tariffs on all products becoming inflationary if we don't watch it. With that, I'll take some questions.
Senator, thank you. Thank you for that. And we do have a few questions for you this morning that have come in. The first one's coming in from Chris. And Chris is saying current debt levels are 37 trillion. How should we think about that in terms of investments, tax policy, et cetera?
Well, you worry that the debt to GDP ratio will get so large it will undermine. You'll start having a hard time selling treasury notes to finance our debt. Right now, that hasn't happened, but I worry about that. Part of reconciliation is to reduce spending by 1.5 trillion over a decade. We're expected to collect about $5.5 trillion in taxes this year. We're spending about 7.2 trillion. Well, if we could cut spending over a decade, and I'm the budget chairman, the next budget I'm going to produce will be about 6.5 trillion. Now, why is that? If you look at what we were spending on the federal government before COVID, is about 4.4 trillion. Well, COVID's behind us now. All that spending is behind us. So I want to take 4.4 trillion, adjust it for inflation and population growth, and that would give you about 6.5 trillion. We're spending about 700 to 800 billion dollars a year. That was generated by COVID that's no longer necessary. So my goal is to have the lines cross one day. As the revenue goes up, because we make the tax cuts permanent, they will. When you cut taxes, you get more revenue, not less. And if we could begin over time to bend the spending curve, then we could actually balance the budget. That doesn't wipe out the deficit, but it's a damn good start on breaking this cycle. So part of reconciliation is to have the tax cuts become permanent to increase revenue. But for the first time really ever, DOGE has been great to go through the federal budget and reduce spending. If we don't do those two things, we become grease over time, and that's not good.
All right, next question is coming from Grace. And Grace is asking, what's one issue not getting enough attention that you think we ought to be paying more attention to here at home?
Iran. It's not good for a religious theocracy who openly calls for the destruction of Israel to have this much highly enriched uranium that can make bombs. We don't pay enough attention to that. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, I think the Ayatollah would use it. He's a religious fanatic. He openly calls for purifying Islam, destroying Israel. You don't want that guy and his thugs to have a bomb. And the Arabs are not going to let the Iranians have a bomb without some response. And you could have a nuclear arms race in the Mideast. Now, what does that mean for the world? Absolute chaos. So I stand with Israel proudly, and I want to try to find a peaceful solution to the Iranian nuclear problem. But if Israel has to use military force, then I want to help them.
Thank you for that. Next question is coming in from Ray. And Ray's asking, when do you feel like the Ukraine-Russian war will come to an end? And will Russia make any concessions in the peace plan?
Well, they'll have to make concessions in the peace plan or we won't have one, but that's a good question. I think sooner rather than later. The sanctions that I've introduced with Senator Blumenthal, a Democrat, we'll have 67 co-sponsors by the end of the week. Do you know how hard it is to get 2/3 of the Senate to agree on anything? I'm really proud of the effort here. These sanctions are bone crushing. What do they do? If Russia walks away and continues to try to resist efforts to have peace, then what I think we need to do is cripple their economy even further. And how do you do that? Instead of putting sanctions on Russian businesses, which is hard to implement, let's put tariffs on countries that buy Russian gas, oil, uranium, and other products. Having to choose between the American economy and Russia, that will really isolate them. The concessions I expect to be made by Russia is that we're going to have European troops in Ukraine acting as tripwires and monitors for any peace deal we do. We're going to make it clear that we're going to continue to help the Ukrainian military, not dismantle it, and be very clear to Putin what happens if there's another invasion. There'll be land swaps. You know, you're not going to get every Russian out of Ukraine, but Russia's not going to take Kyiv. But in 2014, when we did the last peace deal, we failed to do three things: help Ukraine's military, tell Putin what happens if you invade again, and we didn't do anything to build Ukrainians' economy up. So I want to do the critical minerals deal between Ukraine and the United States. They have trillions of dollars worth of critical minerals necessary for the AI economy. They're ready to do a deal with us. That could be a huge benefit to our economy, give us an investment in Ukraine we don't have today, something worth defending. And so, yes, I expect if there's a peace deal, there'll be some land swaps, but there'll be some understandings. This time we didn't have last time. NATO admission by Ukraine will be off the table. But if they ever invade again, then Ukraine goes into NATO as a form of deterrence.
Senator, we have two more questions for you if you have time for them.
I do.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Next one is coming in from Debbie. And Debbie's saying that you've always had a strong stance on China. With everything happening on the trade and tech front, what's your take on where that relationship is going and what's at stake for us?
Well, lots at stake for us. China cheats. They steal our intellectual property. I'm glad Trump's pushing back. We should have done this years ago. So Taiwan, about 80% of the chips that go into the digital economy come out of Taiwan. It's in our interest for Taiwan to remain free and aligned with us. So I'm excuse me, put sanctions together that would tell China what would happen to their economy if they invaded Taiwan, called pre-invasion sanctions. I'm hoping we can level out the tariff disparity, but the main thing I'm hoping for is that the trade barriers that China creates to have an advantage in the trading world will fall, like currency manipulation, requiring a Chinese board member of any company you open in China, which gives you a disadvantage. They'll steal your stuff. So I appreciate President Trump standing up to China.
All right. Senator, the next question is coming from Ron. And reporting on shipments into U.S. ports is that they are reduced by 20%. What do you see for the balance of the rest of the year?
Well, until we start getting trade agreements, there'll be some pain associated with this. But there are a lot of countries that really do want to do trade agreements with us that would be beneficial to us. And let's get going with it. BMW makes more cars for BMW in Greenville than any plant BMW has, including Germany. And they're shipped out of the Port of Charleston. I'm hoping we will come up with an export credit. If a company does business in America, they make a product that's sold overseas, $10 billion worth of exports come out of Greenville, that they will get some relief on the tariffs. But we need to build more ships because most of the ships on the oceans today are made by China and other countries. So it's going to take a while to level this out. I don't like the idea of permanent tariffs economy-wide, but you're going to need that to get people's attention. From the chamber's point of view, trade is so important. The Port of Charleston is a godsend, and we're trying to do the Jasper Port. We're trying to make sure that we're an export economy, but also that we have access to other people's markets. So what I would ask for is some patience here. What President Trump is doing is to level the field. It should have been a long time ago. I just attended the Heritage. As you can tell, if you watch me play, I'm not wasting your money on the golf course. I've never seen the course look better. The community is just popping. I love your part of the state. The chamber is a group that works together for the common good, and I applaud you for that. And if you're not a member, you should join. I found the Hilton Head Chamber to be one of the most effective in the state. And I'll come back sometimes later in the year and go to the restaurants and play golf and visit people. So I can't wait.
Senator, it's been a delight to have you with us today. We were so appreciative of you coming down to the RBC Heritage and being a part of that this year. And your swing's always good.
You should a good salesman. All right.
All right. Well, thanks for your time this morning, Senator, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, bud.
Senator Lindsey Graham. We're going to transition now back to the home front and talk a little bit about the Chamber's Leadership Hilton Head Bluffton program. And we're delighted to have with us today Lynn King, who's the incoming chair of the Board of Regents for the Leadership Hilton Head Bluffton program. Lynn's been a tremendous volunteer, not only with Leadership Hilton Head Bluffton, but just in the Low Country for years, and a true someone who's truly committed to making others better. Lynn, thank you for being with us today, and tell us what we can look forward to with the Leadership Bluffton program.
Well, Bill, thank you for having me. I do feel like I've been an ambassador and a cheerleader for a number of years of this program since I went through it in 2014 after having lived here for many, many years and thinking I was integrated in the community. It was quite an eye-opening thing for me. So I cherish the opportunity of trying to get more people involved in the program. For over 40 years, as you know, it's a flagship program of the Hilton Head Island Bluffton Chamber. And it truly is a catalyst for bringing young emerging leaders into the forefront of the community and learning more about where they live, where they work. I'm proud to be the incoming chair. This is my second term on the board since I graduated from the program years ago. And we've lived here for 42 years. So the leadership program started after Kevin and I relocated here. So I feel like I've been immersed in the community for quite a while. It's a 10-month program. We expose all of the class members each year to a variety of topics. We immerse them in the local economy. They learn about culture and history, business, local governments, Beaufort County governments, our justice system. We get an opportunity to go and meet with our legislators and the government officials in Columbia for a state government overnight trip, which is fabulous. We hear about the cutting edge education systems that are going on down here in the area, and it truly is referred to often as a master's degree in the Low Country. The pillars of the program include the class days for 10 months, as I said, 1 day a month. One of the topics is featured, and our Board of Regents for the leadership program are actually those that put the programs together, find the venues, find the speakers, and bring that to the class each month. There's a class project component. We're very proud of that. For many years, the class projects have included things like Wheels to Waves, the handicapped wheelchair access to the beach, Reel and Recycle. Class a few years ago found that the monofilament was getting into the local waters and was causing environmental hazards. And so Reel and Recycle actually has dispensers now at docks throughout Beaufort County for Beaufort County to now be able to help recycle that material and keep it out of the water. If you've been to the Bluffton Public Library, there's a library park out there. It used to be just an open space, kind of not very well kept, and the class from several years ago put together a library park in conjunction with the Beaufort County Library System. And it's a park now that welcomes visitors and residents to come and enjoy the landscape. There's storyboards that the Beaufort County Library keeps put together. Anything that does improve the life and the quality of life of the residents in the community is where the class projects focus. The class members each year do their own class project. The Board of Regents simply guides them and keeps them in the parameters. We're proud to be a part of the Hilton Head Island Bluffton Chamber, so we want everything that our program does to reflect well on our program as well as the chamber and the community. The program is open to professionals that live and or work in Beaufort County. We look for people that have been here for at least a year. That gives you a chance to have been a little bit more immersed in the community and know a little bit more about what you're going to experience. Since 1985, we have over 700 people have graduated from the program, and many of which still live and work in this area. So the Leadership Alumni Association is the next step for all of these leadership graduates to stay involved with their class members, fellow alums that have been through the program before them. And the Leadership Alumni Program gives us an opportunity to continue to give back to the community. You mentioned volunteerism a little earlier in the promo, and one of the other pillars of the program is class members are required as part of the program to participate in civic, service, volunteerism. We call it community enrichment activities, CEAs, but it really is volunteer efforts for us to get those class members immersed in the community, learn more about our nonprofits, find a passion they may have, so that when they finish this program, many of us have rolled into board positions, volunteer positions. We're ambassadors for those programs in the community, and I truly think that's what keeps us all being good citizens and helping improve the quality of life for everybody that lives and works here. We are in an application process now through May the 12th. The applications are online through the Hilton Head Island Bluffton Chamber website. You're welcome to call the Hilton Head Island Bluffton Chamber and speak to Laura Alice, who is our chamber liaison. She can answer any questions that anybody may have about applying, and any of the questions that you might have about what it takes to be involved and what the timeline is. The class kicks off in August, and our Board of Regents will be working between now and middle of the summer to put together the program for next year. And we look forward to another great class, and we're helping this class wind up for their graduation coming up in June.
Lynn, very exciting. And May the 12th is the deadline for applications. And we appreciate your leadership and you being with us today. And we look forward to having another great class. And by
Thanks,
the way,
Bill.
one question for you. What was the best class of all?
2014.
I knew that was going to be.
And we happen to have a mayor out of our class. So we do kind of hold that. We're very proud of Alan, you know.
That's great. Well, thank you for being with us. And to all of our listeners today, thank you for joining in. We remind you, May 5 through 9 is Small Business Week and National Tourism Week. Have a great rest of your week. And thanks for all of our participants. Have a great day.